is a common question I get. Of course, everybody's experience of this is their own, but dear Adya, the self which my programming left me with has had to deal with depression and anxiety, and in the parentheses, mental illness, so that I'm taking for granted through the rest of this email that that we're not dealing with just the garden variety, you're a little down on one day or you're a little anxious one day, but it becomes more of a sustained and systemic issue that you deal with. I have found that on my journey to enlightenment, the programming around the mental illness has had to be healed first, and the ego strengthened as a means to follow the path to enlightenment. I am seeing that for whatever reason, maybe the shame around mental illness, which the messages produce, somehow makes it harder for me to disidentify with the false identities. I would love to hear your thoughts around this subject, and it has come up in my inquiry. Love and deep gratitude. Florin. I get asked a lot of questions about not only different mental states, but what people call mental illness. I think it's an unfortunate word, isn't it? Term. Like when you have when you have kidney disease or heart disease or something, it doesn't feel the same, does it? Because we're so conditioned to think if it's in my mind that if I have some sort of disorder in my mind, like we can have in any other organ in our body, we can have disorders in our kidneys and our liver and our heart and our lungs, just about any part of your body you can think of, your joints. But somehow when it's in our mind, which is this, or in our brain, which is this extraordinarily complex organ, that it has this stigma about it. A stigma that you wouldn't feel when you have heart disease. You don't think, oh, I'm some inadequate person because I have heart disease or kidney disease or diabetes or whatever it might be. So there's this stigma that people that deal with ways in which the brain isn't functioning at its optimal level. People have to go through all sorts of stigma, which is really unfortunate. And when they get into spirituality, of course, especially people who have to take different, medications, whether they're anti-anxiety or anti-depression or medications for, there's many different types of spiritual illness or manic depression, and on it goes, going into schizophrenic, and, there's many different kinds. And people often ask me who really are taking a certain medication to literally to get by and to survive. In the same way that if you had heart disease, you might take a medication, right? Or if you had an infection, a systemic infection in your body, you might take antibiotics without thinking anything. You wouldn't think, oh, this is going to get in the way of my spiritual progress. But somehow those people that need to take some sort of medication, something that brings coherence and balance back to the brain, that there's a stigma about that. And this is what I always tell people. I really want to make this very clear to anybody, any of you who are dealing with these kinds of more serious mental issues, is that if you do have to take some kind of medication, now, obviously, in this country, we over-medicate ourselves all the time. If we get a little depressed, we take a medication. We get a little anxious, we take a medication. But if something's more serious, if there's a fundamental imbalance, that's different. That's different. And some people need to take some form of medication so that they can function. And to those people, I want to be very, very clear. That does not get in your way of awakening or enlightenment. It only gets in your way if you think it does, if you believe it does, right? You're just taking a medication to bring more health and order to an organ in your body. Your brain is just another organ, right? And inherently, it's not going to get in your way unless you think it does. And I've seen this. I've worked with hundreds of people that have brought me this issue. And I've seen that if they don't believe that it's going to get in the way, then it doesn't. But if they really believe it's somehow going to impede their spirituality, then it tends to do that. But really, they're only living out their belief. So I would really suggest that if you do have to take any kind of medication, be very certain that it does not in and of itself get in your way. Sometimes if you really need to bring balance and order to your mind, not taking a medication may get in your way, because your mind may go into such a state of disorder and conflict that you have no energy or focus in order to engage in spirituality. Now, there's lots of people who are dealing with various mental issues that they're not taking medication for, and they don't need to. But maybe it's something that's prolonged. Maybe it's something that's a serious part of their life, but they've found other means that are good enough to help them. You know, meditation has been shown to be, if done correctly, it's shown to be an extraordinarily helpful thing to do for almost every form of mental illness. Not necessarily every single form, but the vast majority of them. And even, of course, it improves anxiety and depression, and all of this has been deeply and extensively studied. So meditation brings a great amount of, it's not a cure-all for those who have more serious mental challenges, but boy, it's been shown to help often as much, if not more, than a lot of the medications people are taking. So I always think, whether you have to take medication or you don't, meditation is a helpful thing to do every day. It's a really helpful thing to do every day. It just naturally, to everybody, even if your mind is relatively balanced. Few people's minds are relatively balanced, number one. Just open your eyes and watch how human beings behave and what goes on inside them, and you realize, boy, you know, most everybody's dealing with some state of chaos almost. But for everybody, meditation is a great way to brings order to the mind. And it literally can change the structure at a physical level of the brain. Certain areas of your brain can grow. Those areas that help bring a more coherence to the brain can literally physically grow through engaging in some form of daily meditation. So I think it's important to understand that. It's also important to not think that if you have to take medication, it's going to get in your way. Most everybody in life will go through some amount of depression in their life and some amount of anxiety. That's not unusual. And spiritual practices and our inquiry is motivated by many people, probably most people that come to me. A big part of their motivation is, I don't want to suffer so much anymore. I don't want to be depressed. I don't want to be as anxious, as fearful as I am. I would say 9 out of 10 people that come to me, that's a big part of their motivation, is they simply don't want to suffer so much. And suffering is a mental event. Even if we have some physical pain, it's the suffering component, it's a mental event. And spirituality is a very profound way of approaching and dealing with the challenges of what it is to be a human being, to penetrate through our fears, through our anxieties, to penetrate through our ideologies, right? We're really penetrated into a deeper structure of the mind, at least from one point of view. So yeah, sure, if you're experiencing any kind of emotional upheaval, sure, it makes your spiritual, heck, it makes everything more difficult, doesn't it? When you're anxious or you're feeling a lot of fear or you're whatever you're experiencing, it doesn't just make spirituality more challenging. We all know it makes everything more challenging. That's a universal for all human beings. But it doesn't innately mean that it gets in your way. If anything, it provides a big part of the impetus and motivation to break through into deeper, more fundamental dimensions of being. That itself brings great coherence. When it matures, great coherence and stability into the mind. It's kind of a fortunate byproduct, I would say, of a deeper, more mature spirituality.